Imagine it's just before midnight on July 27th, 2010. You're standing in a parking lot outside of a game store, or maybe you're home watching a download bar crawl toward 100%. It's been 12 years since the first one. 12 years since a single strategy game holding an entire country spellbound. 12 years of players in Seoul filling arenas the way we fill football stadiums. And now, the sequel is finally actually here. In a few seconds, you're going to click play on StarCraft II. Spin that same late July week back across gaming history, and it only gets stranger. A cult classic arcade port landing on a console almost nobody bought. A brand new Halo game running on an Atari built in 1977. And a little phone game about building a village that's about to swallow the whole world. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back to This Week in Video Game History. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we are covering July 27th through August 2nd, a stretch of the calendar that somehow packed in a savage arcade classic reborn on a supercharged console almost nobody bought, the most anticipated strategy sequel ever made, 12 years in the waiting, a weapons-based fighter that somehow got Darth Vader and Yoda to show up swinging lightsabers, the Blue Bombers leap into the 32-bit era, and the first time you got to play as Zero, a brand new Halo squeezed onto hardware built in 1977, a hand-drawn black and white nightmare about a boy and his missing sister, and a little phone game that quietly rewired the entire industry. Plus, two stories worth sticking around for. How a company that started out selling cleaning equipment ended up giving us ninjas and Sunday football, and how one strategy game turned South Korea into the esports capital of the planet. Then we'll close with our monthly roundup, digging up the August releases the history books only remember by the month. So grab your controller and press start to continue. Here's everything that dropped during the week of July 27th through August 2nd across gaming history. 7 games spanning everything from a doomed 16-bit console to the phone in your pocket. Let's run it. First up, July 27th, 1990 in Japan. Capcom's arcade nightmare Ghouls and Ghosts, known over there as Dai Makamura, arrives on the NEC SuperGrafx. Now, if you've never heard of the SuperGrafx, don't feel bad. Almost nobody has. It was NEC's souped-up follow-up to the PC Engine. The console we got over here was the TurboGrafx 16. And it was supposed to be a powerhouse. Instead, it launched, sputtered, and died with a grand total of about 6 games to its names. Ghouls and Ghosts was its showpiece, a near arcade-perfect port of one of the hardest games ever made. The one where you play a knight who gets knocked clean out of his armor and down to his boxer shorts in a single hit. On the SuperGrafx, it looks spectacular. It just happened to be spectacular on a machine that was already a ghost itself. Today, it's the reason SuperGrafx is remembered at all. Proof that sometimes the best game on a system is the one holding its tombstone. Same date, July 27th, but jump ahead about 20 years to 2010. StarCraft II Wings of Liberty finally lands. And finally is doing a lot of the work in that sentence. The original StarCraft came out in 1998. That's 12 years of waiting. 12 years in which the first game didn't just stay alive, it became a national sport in South Korea. That's a story we'll get into later. Blizzard sold something like 1.5 million copies of the sequel in 2 days. 3 million a month. It was the first chapter of a planned trilogy built around the Terrans and a grizzled rebel named Jim Raynor. Stores opened at midnight. People took the day off from work. And For a real-time strategy game, a genre that plenty of folks had written off, that was a staggering thing to witness. Hold that thought though, because StarCraft's bigger story is coming up in a bit. On July 29, 2008, SoulCalibur IV swung onto the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and it does the most 2008 thing imaginable. It crosses over with Star Wars. This is a weapons-based fighting game, the series people point to as the gold standard for swordplay. And Namco decided the roster needed a Jedi. So, if you bought it on PlayStation 3, you got Darth Vader. On Xbox 360, you got Yoda. And everybody got Starkiller, the apprentice from The Force Unleashed. It sounds like a gimmick, and it kinda was, but it was also the peak of an era when fighting games were stuffing in guest characters just to see who you'd cross the streams with. SoulCalibur IV is the last entry a lot of longtime fans consider truly great, which gives it a bittersweet spot on the calendar. Now, a two-day event. July 31st, 1997 on the Sega Saturn and August 1st on the PlayStation, Mega Man X4. This was the Blue Bomber's real arrival in the 32-bit era, and Capcom used the extra horsepower for gorgeous hand-drawn sprites and, brace yourself, fully animated cutscenes with voice acting. Some of the voice acting is legendarily rough, but X4 gave fans something they'd wanted for years. You could play the entire game as Zero, the red armored rival, with his own story, his own saber, and his own ending. For a lot of people, X4 is the high water mark for the whole X series, the last one before Capcom started chasing 3D and things got complicated. 2 consoles, 2 days, 1 very good robot. Jump ahead to 2010, and July 31st hands us one of the strangest entries on the whole calendar. It's called Halo 2600, and yes, that's Halo, Master Chief, and the biggest console franchise of its generation, running on the Atari 2600, a machine from 1977. It was made by Ed Fries, who is not some random hobbyist. He ran Microsoft's game division and helped get the original Xbox and the original Halo out the door. He taught himself how to program for the 2600 for fun and squeezed a tiny top-down Halo adventure into 4 kilobytes of code. It debuted at a classic gaming expo, and it's exactly the kind of thing this show lives for. Proof that people never stop tinkering with the machines they grew up on. This isn't a lost commercial release, it's a homebrew love letter. 33 years of gaming folded into one cartridge. Last episode, I mentioned this game in passing, but on August 2nd, 2011, a small, strange game called LIMBO crept onto the PC. Purists will remind you it first showed up on the Xbox Live Arcade the summer before, but 2011 is when it hit Steam and really found its audience. LIMBO is a hand-drawn black and white puzzle platformer about a nameless boy who wakes up in a shadowy forest looking for his sister. No dialogue, no real music, no explanation. Just fog, silhouettes, and an awful lot of ways to die. And that's the point. You learn by dying, over and over, in a world that plays like a nightmare somebody half remembers. It came from a tiny Danish studio called Playdead, and it became one of those games people held up to argue that downloadable titles could be art. Small, bleak, and unforgettable. And we'll close this timeline on August 2nd, 2012, the day a little Finnish studio called Supercell put Clash of Clans on the iPhone. If you were around for it, you remember, everybody's phone suddenly had this cartoon village on it. Barbarians and wizards and walls, and everybody was in a clan, raiding each other for gold and elixir. It was free to download, which was the whole trick. It made its billions by the fistful on in-app purchases. Android players had to wait more than a year for their turn. Love it or roll your eyes at it, Clash of Clans is one of the games that defined the free-to-play mobile era and turned Supercell into one of the most profitable game companies on Earth, dollar for dollar. From a doomed console in 1990 to the phone in your pocket in 2012. That's the week. Our first deep dive starts with a birthday. On July 31st, 1967, a company called Tecmo opened its doors in Tokyo. And here's the part that gets me. They didn't make video games. They didn't make toys. They sold cleaning equipment, maintenance supplies for buildings, mops, basically. But somewhere along the way, they got to look at the amusement business, and by the early 80s, they reinvented themselves as an arcade company. If you spent any time in an arcade back then, you played their stuff without even knowing it. Bomb Jack, Star Force, a trackball soccer game called Tecmo World Cup. And in 1986, they changed their name to one you absolutely know, Tecmo. And then we got legendary. Tecmo Bowl, the football game that made your friends stop speaking to you. Ninja Gaiden, with those cinematic cutscenes nobody else was even attempting on the NES. Down the Line, Fatal Frame, Dead or Alive, Monster Rancher. Not bad for a mop company. Tecmo Bowl was always my go-to game and one of the reasons I was briefly a Raiders fan in Charger Country. It was all about Bo Jackson. He was OP before OP became a term. But the peak of my love for Tecmo came from Tecmo Super Bowl. Every NFL team, the first game I remember with real statistics kept for the entire season, and it kept that Tecmo feel. I still think fondly of that game even to this day. Now, the full story, how a janitorial supply outfit became one of the most beloved names in the NES, all the way to the Koei merger, that's a story big enough for its own episode, and we'll give you one down the road. But every year on July 31st, it's worth tipping your cap to the cleaning company that armed a whole generation of ninjas. Earlier, I told you to hold a thought about StarCraft, and here it is. When Blizzard released StarCraft in 1998, it did just fine here in the States. But in South Korea, it did something nobody could have scripted. It became a sport. The timing was perfect. Korea was rolling out high-speed internet faster than just about anywhere on Earth, and these places called PC bangs, or gaming cafes, were opening on every corner. StarCraft became the thing you did there, and it jumped to television. Actual cable channels broadcasting matches with play-by-play commentators, highlight reels, and screaming crowds. The players became famous. A man named Lim Johan, known as Boxer the Emperor, had fan clubs with hundreds of thousands of members. Pro gamers signed with teams, drew real salaries, filled arenas. There was a whole governing body for it. This was esports as a national pastime, years before most of the world even had the word. So when the sequel finally arrived in 2010, it wasn't landing in a vacuum. It was landing on top of the biggest competitive gaming scene the planet had ever seen. How one strategy game turned an entire country into the capital of esports? That's a story we'll have to get back to and in full in another time. But that's why the wait for StarCraft II mattered so much. Before we wrap up, it's time for our monthly roundup. Here's how this works. Some games come with a nice clean release date, a single day we can point to. Others, history only remembers by the month. Those games don't get a seat in the timeline, but they're too good to leave on the shelf. So as we roll into August, here are a few that landed sometime this month back in the day. First up, Faxunadu, August 1989 on the NES. That name is a mashup. Famicom plus Xanadu, and it's a moody side-scrolling action RPG from Hudson and Falcom, where you play a wandering elf coming home to find his world withering at the roots of a giant tree. Strange, atmospheric, and quietly beloved. Next up, Life Force, August 1988, also on the NES. Konami's run-and-gun shooter, the one where you fly your ship straight into a giant living organism and blast your way out from the inside. 2-player co-op, a power-up bar Gradius fans knew by heart, and a whole lot of eaten quarters. And one more, though I'll tread lightly, because longtime listeners know we've already given this one its own spotlight. Dragon Warrior, 1989, the game Nintendo famously gave away for free to Nintendo Power subscribers because they massively overproduced it, and in the process, quietly planted the seed for the entire console RPG boom here in America. We won't retell that whole saga tonight, just tipping the cap to it landing this month in North America. Let's end back where the week got strange. Around 2010, a man named Ed Fries, someone who had helped launch the Xbox and who had helped bring Halo into the world, sat down with an Atari 2600, a machine older than most of the careers he'd built, and he taught himself from scratch how to make it do something brand new. Not for money, not for a deadline, just because he loved it. And that's the thread running through this whole week if you pull on it. A cleaning supply company that couldn't stop tinkering until it was making ninjas. A strategy game that an entire country decided to turn into an esport. A doomed little console that got one gorgeous game before the lights went out. None of it was inevitable. All of it came from somebody looking at a screen and thinking, I wonder what else this could do. That right there is the history of this medium. Not just the blockbusters, the mop companies, the midnight launches, the 4 kilobytes of code made out of pure love. We got to visit a whole lot this week, July 27th through August 2nd. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode. Thank you all so much for sticking around. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe over on YouTube or follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It genuinely helps. It doesn't cost you anything. Artwork for the show is done by Ms. Tink. Music is produced by Shane Mandini. Go follow him on Twitch and Spotify and listen to all his great work. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me, Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.